Hi, this is Dr. Chandler, and this is the project scenario for analyzing project risks. And for this scenario, we're using the same example project that we've been using in the previous risk management courses. So let's get going. All right, so just a brief overview of the environmental factors that existed in the organization that had this project. It was a very old professional association located in Washington, D.C., and this professional association, the members of it are not individual people. This professional association's members are other organizations. And within this professional association, its own organizational units didn't have a history of cooperating or collaborating with each other. They really were very separate and focused on their own goals, meeting their own constituents' needs, and not concerning themselves with trying to do other things with the other units within the organization. They had a brand new chief information officer who had come into the organization, and that person was considered an outsider by the existing senior executives that were there. And they had an existing association management system that functioned really well. It met their needs, but it was incredibly out of date and very slow and not responsive. And it wasn't a system that looked like a modern kind of system. It didn't work with mobile devices. It didn't work with the internet. And they wanted to replace that with a brand new off-the-shelf system. The organization didn't have any project management standard processes in place. So they wanted to buy an off-the-shelf system that was an association management system and load their data into it and start using it so they could reap the benefits from doing that. And at the same time, they wanted to also identify all of the gaps, because there were a lot of things that their existing system did that they knew a new system wouldn't do. So they wanted to work with the vendor that they were buying the off-the-shelf system from and design and then implement custom-tailored changes to the off-the-shelf system. So they wanted to do these projects in parallel like this, and they thought this project would take about a year, and there was no risk management planning that was done for this project. So no risk management plan was created. They were just winging it for the risk management aspects. So with that as our background, let's talk about analyzing the risks that we identified that were associated with this project that we identified in the last course and in the last project scenario video. So the next slides are going to present the results of a really simple qualitative analysis of the risks that were identified in the previous course. And this analysis only is focusing on the probability and impact part. And the quantitative risk analysis, that's not required for all projects, and undertaking that depends on the availability of the data that's necessary for doing that kind of quantitative analysis, and not all projects are capable of producing that kind of data. And that's usually, that kind of quantitative risk analysis is usually done by with some specialized risk software and some special risk management analysts. So, and it also obviously takes additional time and resources to do that quantitative risk analysis. So let's get into, and I'll try to move here. I'll move me a little bit there so you can see the matrix. So a probability and impact matrix, this is an incredibly simple one. There's a more complex looking one, but it's the same idea. It just has more rows and more columns, so it's delineating the categories more discreetly. But basically, the concept is the same. in determining what the probability of a risk occurring is, and then determining what the impact on the project is, and just using these simple categories of low, medium, high, the risks themselves can be placed in these different boxes, and then this allows for prioritizing the investments that are available to do risk management for the project, and to prioritize those resources to focus on the risks that have these highest numbers, right? They would be the highest priority ones. The risks that have the highest probability of occurring and the highest impact on the project. Those would be the ones, excuse me, that would be most beneficial for the project team to tackle. So for this project, I'm simply using my hindsight judgment about these risks, and I'm going to use these numbers from these cells when I discuss in the following slides. When I identify the risks, I'll be using these numbers on them, and that's going to be easier than trying to actually drop the text into a matrix like this. But the matrix is good to create it and use this, especially with individuals, stakeholders, and others who are on a project team who are not familiar with risk management. Showing them this kind of risk matrix is really helpful, because it's the visual aspect of it is really easy to quickly understand what it's conveying. So, all right, so I'll move me back over here, out of the way here. Okay, so high probability and high impact. So conflict between the executive stakeholders was one of the risks that was identified, and also the possibility for executive turnover. Remember that the CIO had just recently joined the organization, and it's not uncommon for individuals at that senior executive level, when joining a new organization, to decide within a short period of time that it wasn't a good fit. Either the organization is deciding that it wasn't a good fit, or the individual themselves, or a mutual decision like that it wasn't a good fit, and the individual can leave within a year time frame. And since that's not uncommon, and that's the situation we are in, that was identified as a high probability and high impact on the project. So these risks were identified as being category or priority number 9. The next high probability and high impact risk was that and this was discussed, and there was actually more risks identified on the slide in the previous course, but I narrowed it down and focused it in on just these, because having multiple individual risk statements that really are all stemming from the same source isn't particularly helpful, because you wouldn't want to be allocating lots of different resources to all of those. And if the same person is going to be responsible for dealing with this particular risk, and it's all emanating from the same place, narrowing that down makes a lot of sense. So I've narrowed it down to these two, and it could probably be narrowed down to just one, is that there was no project management process in place for this project. There was no risk management plan developed. There was no project management methodology. Everyone was just, projects, sure, you just manage them, you just deal with whatever comes up. You set time frames, and you tell people what to do, and things just happen. I'm being a little bit sarcastic about it, but I think all of you have seen that type of attitude used in managing projects in organizations before, and that's a risk when project management processes are not followed for projects. All right, the next category 9, high probability, high impact risk, it related to the previous one, and this is in the area of change control, of change management. There was no change management process, no change management system, and there was no change management board. There was no set of individuals. And so that was actually something that they did think, oh, we better put together a group of individuals who will review all of these gaps that are being identified and prioritize them and approve them, because otherwise we're just going to get everything under the sun and we don't have an endless budget. So, okay, the next, so those were the 9s. So these fell into the category 8, high probability and medium impact. And so scope creep, of course, is a risk on many projects, and also gold plating. So the project team, the individuals who were attending the gap analysis sessions, and this is not an accusation for any individuals. No one's doing anything malicious when these types of things happen. It's very easy to be thinking innovatively, and when identifying new requirements, or in this case it was identifying gaps between the new system and the existing system, it was entirely normal and expected that individuals would not only identify the gap, but they would also start discussing the elements that they had either recently requested be added to their existing system, or things that they had been thinking about adding to the existing system, additional functionality that they had been thinking about that was relevant to whatever the gap was they were discussing. That would be very normal for that to occur. And so putting the brakes on during those gap analysis meetings and identifying exactly where is the line between exactly what exists now and what is a new thing, that is really challenging. And for the people who have to do that in those kinds of meetings, it can feel like you're stepping on or interfering with the innovation of the individuals in the group. After all, the whole focus of the project is to move the organization forward, is to move it into the current time frame and to stop using the old technology and start generating new things. So why would these new things not be accepted in that kind of context? So it can be really challenging to facilitate those kind of sessions and to be strict about where the lines are drawn, where the boundaries are. So another category 8, high probability, medium impact, the communication. The project manager that was promoted, remember this was an individual who had been a programmer with the organization for a long period of time, but had never served as project manager and had been promoted to that position. And I was mentoring that individual. And I described what that mentoring was like trying to prevent this person from drowning, right? But actually teach them how to swim while all they were trying to do was stop themselves from drowning. Well, the communication overhead is identified as a risk here because that was the sole person who was expected to attend a lot of senior executive meetings and brief them on where the project was, and the culture in the organization had been such that all the senior executives wanted to hear was what all the good things, like when is this system going to be done, how great is it going to be, and whatnot. And so and again, here's where the risks, there's some intersectionality amongst the interdependence amongst the risks where they're compounding on each other. So there was no project management processes. There was a project manager with no project management experience and a single point of contact, the inexperienced person who was going into the executive sessions and was the only person that was there and assigned to communicate what was going on to the project, and also then bring back whatever guidance or feedback was coming from the senior executives. And so that single point of failure certainly was a risk for the project. Another high probability and medium impact risk was the learning curves that were that existed because the individuals who were assisting with the gap analysis, I explained this in the last video, they were young and extremely inexperienced, not only with the system that was sold by the organization that employed them, they didn't know anything about the organization whose project it was. And in addition to that, they didn't have any experience doing gap analysis. So the learning curve was quite steep indeed. And like I said, they were friendly, they were energetic. You couldn't fault them as individuals, but this was definitely a high probability risk. Another, the next one we have here is medium probability, high impact. And on the matrix that we were looking at, where the 7 and the 8 go could be switched. In some organizations, they might say, oh no, we would consider this one to be the next number after the 9. The 9 obviously goes up in that upper right corner, but some organizations might say that this one is the 7, or they might say that's the 8 and that one is the, either way. And that wouldn't make too much difference as long as the organization was being consistent about that. But in this case, in the 7 grouping with medium probability and high impact, the cost forecasting, since the vendor that was doing the cost plus fixed fee part of this project and conducting the gap analysis, that was not a mainstream service that they provided. This was really out of the ordinary for them. And so whatever data they used to do their cost estimates was just by definition, because it was something they hadn't typically done, that risk, the accuracy of those forecasts fell into this category. Let me make sure I'm out of the way there. So another 7, medium probability, high impact, was regards to the stakeholders. So the stakeholders, now remember that they did not have a history of collaborating and cooperating with each other well and coming together and compromising for the good of the entire organization. That's really not how they operated. They really did have even this one association management system that they all used had been tailored and customized for each organizational unit. There was different terminology even for the same data or the same functions. The different units used it differently, called it different things, had different timings for things, and that was allowed and that was supported for a long time. So the idea of coming together and using a corporate level system that required all of the organizational units to call things the same thing, to perform functions that were the same function and do it all the same way across the organization. That was not only uncomfortable and new to them, for them, that was a signal that that something was wrong. That was a signal that they were not able to serve their constituents at the level that they had promised the service to them. Because remember, this is a professional association, and their whole reason for being in existence is to serve their constituents. And so this was something that was really uncomfortable for this organization. And all of these risks around stakeholders dropping their enthusiasm for the project or pulling out of the project at any point in time, that was always a risk. Another in the 7 category, medium probability, high impact, was with regards to the design. So recall that no one in the vendor organization really understood the data relationships that existed in the existing system. So the new system had people data and it had organization data. And the existing system had people data and it had organization data. However, The new system, the off-the-shelf system being sold by the vendor, considered individuals as the members of an association. And that's not how the client was, that's not how, what the client did. That's not the client organization. The client organization, their members were organizations. And so this may seem like a trivial difference, and it did to the vendor for a long time. This seemed like, well, how could that possibly matter? And it mattered a great deal. And it wasn't obvious to a lot of individuals how much it really mattered until the further we got into the gap analysis, the more it became evident all of the problems that were stemming from the fundamental difference in the data design that would be necessary to support this organization. Another 7, medium probability and high impact, what deals with the technology components, and there's a lot of them here. And so security is certainly a concern. The technology being over-engineered, sometimes can be a difficult concept to comprehend. But remember that the senior executives, and also a lot of the representatives who had seen the off-the-shelf demonstrations, were really amazed and astounded and impressed by the glitziness of what they were seeing from the vendor's off-the-shelf system, and the colors and the clickability and the way that the screens moved and scrolled was super impressive, because the technology of the existing system was so old and clunky. So what that created then was I guess it would be similar to if anyone has ever come across a situation where they saw either a car or an outfit or even a hairstyle in a picture, and then imagined themselves in that picture and thought, oh yeah, that's what I want that. And the problem is in that there's many other components going on. Let's just take the hairstyle one. There's the shape of the head. There's the shape of the face. There's the color of the hair. There's the texture of the hair. There's the thickness of the hair. There's many other components that make that hairstyle work for that individual in the image that might not be the same variables that'll make it work for whoever the person is who desires that thing. So those same sorts of really fundamental, very personal desires on individuals' parts, that's what was going on in this project. And this can be a common thing for a lot of projects, is that individuals are seeing themselves into the future with whatever this new thing is, but they're forgetting that it isn't just like a cut out and paste, right? You can't just cut out the individual that's there and paste yourself in and expect it to work. There's many more things that have to be done to ensure that it's going to work. And how does one know what those many more things are? Well, that comes from implementing effective and best practices of project management. That's where one knows what all those other things are. All right, another 7, medium probability, high impact. Oh, I think we went over those already. Okay, so the next one is related to those with the user interface, right? So although the users were initially really impressed by what the system had to offer, all of these things could have occurred once they actually got into it. And once they got past that, oh, look, it has these cute things and these cute things, and it scrolls like this and it clicks like that, that all of these things were possible. So now I didn't cover all of the risks that we identified in the Identifying Risks course. I went over the ones that were that fell into the 7, 8, and 9 categories. And that's pretty common too. In doing risk identification, it can be really common that you don't end up with especially any 1, 2, and 3 category risks that would fall into the green boxes, because people who are trying to identify the risks aren't even investing any time trying to even think of those possible risks that would fall into those categories, because the whole focus of risk analysis is to be keeping the focus on those high impact, high probability ones. And so that can be really common, is that you have this matrix with the green, yellow, and red categories, and then you don't end up identifying any except for the red ones, which is totally fine, because as the project continues, what we're trying to accomplish with risk management is to, after identifying them and analyzing them, the next step is to put into place risk responses to all of those, to pull those out of the 7, 8, and 9 categories and pull those down into a more manageable range, to do things to mitigate them, to do things to avoid those, there's other strategies for dealing with risk besides mitigation and avoidance. We're going to talk about that in the next course. But so the matrix that shows all those different colors on it is still useful, and it can be very helpful to demonstrate at the start of the project, when we first identify these risks. Look, they were all in the 7, 8, and 9 category. Then we did these things, X, Y, and Z, and explained the actions that are being implemented to reduce those risks. And now we've reduced the risks. Now they're only in these other categories, and that can be very useful. So in analyzing risks, there are some other things that can be examined about them besides just the probability and impact. And these are the other things that can be analyzed about them. The urgency, of course, that has to do with the time period when that could happen. The proximity, that has to do with the time period, but also that's like how close or how far away, like if there's other projects that are related to the one you're doing, and those there could be like layers of projects, like the projects that are within the organizations, then there's projects that exist between that organization and another organization, then there could be projects in outside organizations, and all of those projects, if they have interdependencies, the proximity could be like, well, if that project that's 3 layers out has a problem and gets delayed, that's going to have a different impact on our project than if it's a project that's within our organization. So these are things that can be addressed, and they certainly weren't addressed for this project that that I went through in the scenario, because they didn't have any project management processes in place and no risk management strategies in place. And so we're doing it like after the fact, kind of a post-mortem sort of review on it. And thank you for this, and I'll see you in the next video in the next course.